You're very clear, Rupert, about only going on experience. So, since I have no awareness of deep sleep, should I conclude that it doesn't exist?
Yes. Since I have no awareness of deep sleep, should I conclude that it doesn't exist? Yes, there is no state called deep sleep that exists, that stands out from the background of awareness. Not only does deep sleep not exist, I'm afraid it's worse than that. The dream state and the waking state don't exist. Nothing exists. No thing stands out from God's infinite being. If something stood out from God's infinite being, there would be something other than God's infinite being, and then God's being would not be God's infinite being. God would be finite, and therefore wouldn't be God, and that cannot be.
Yeah, I can say something about my waking state and the dream state. There's something different there.
Something different?
I can say that if we call this the waking state, there's an experience now that I'm aware of. But I can't say the same about the deep sleep.
Have you ever experienced the disappearance of awareness?
No.
Have you experienced the disappearance of a thought, sensation, and perception?
Yes.
So, what remains when a thought, sensation, and perception disappears? Let's just take thoughts. What you have two thoughts, yes? Thought number one appears, it disappears. Thought number two appears and disappears. But at no time is there the disappearance of awareness. So what exists, or what is present, between the two thoughts?
I am, or
yes.
Awareness?
Yes, awareness. So from the point of view of thought, how long does that gap between thoughts last?
Thought knows nothing of it.
Sorry?
Thought knows nothing of the gap.
Thought knows nothing of it. Because thought can only know an object, and all objects appear in thought. So thought cannot know anything about the gap in between thoughts, and therefore it says it is non-existent. But if it was not, if it was non-existent, then there would be no connection between the thoughts. That there would be no continuity to experience. So the duration between two thoughts doesn't take place in time, because time is only in thought. So from thought's point of view, the duration between two thoughts is non-existent. There is no time there. There is nothing there. So deep sleep is the gap between two dream states. A dream state is just two thoughts, or two series of thoughts. So what is called, sorry, did I say the dream state? I meant deep sleep is the gap between two dream states, which means between two thoughts. So how long does that gap last?
It's not in time.
It's not in time. The thought knows nothing of it. That's why the non-objective experience of deep sleep, which is simply the zero-dimensional gap between two images or thoughts, seems to be non-existent from the point of view of thought. Just like the gap between two thoughts seems to be non-existent. But it is your experience that awareness is continuous. When I say your experience, I mean it is awareness's experience. I am continuous, or more accurately, I am ever present.
Yeah, that is the experience.
In other words, deep sleep is not something that lasts in time. It is eternity. It is awareness.
It seems to me that there's no awareness there, since...
Okay, tell me about your experience of there being no awareness.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at, is that...
Right, do you have an experience of the absence of awareness?
No.
So what makes you... so what are you describing as the experience of deep sleep in which there is an absence of awareness?
Well, that's why I'm saying I conclude there's no such thing. Because I have no awareness of it. Yeah, I can be aware of the gap between two thoughts in the waking state.
What is the difference between a gap between two thoughts in the waking state and a gap between two dreams in the sleep state? Neither of them have objective qualities, neither of them appear in time. What is there to distinguish them one from the other? You see, it's the difficulty is because you are... you think the waking state exists in time and deep sleep doesn't. But actually, even the waking state doesn't exist in time. Time is an idea that appears in thought, but it's never an experience. Experience never takes place in time. No one has ever experienced time. In order to experience time, we would have to have experienced a past and a future. No one has ever been to the past or the future.
But there can be an experience in the waking state of no thought.
No, if there's an experience of no thought, you're not in the waking state. The waking state is thought and perception. If there's no thought, there's no waking, you're not in the waking state. Even when there is thought, you're not in the waking state. You are always awareness. But there is no thought appearing in you. You see, you're taking your measure of reality as the waking state.
Right.
Your question is based on the presumption the waking state is the natural state, is the normal state. Dreams are a kind of aberration of the waking state, and deep sleep, if it exists at all, is a kind of temporary blanking of the waking state, and then the next morning we get back to reality again, which is the waking state. No, the waking state is the smallest segment of experience. The dream world is much bigger than the waking world. The collective unconscious is much bigger than the dream world, and infinite awareness is much bigger than the collective unconscious. So start with awareness, not the waking state mind. You use awareness as the place to explore your experience. Explore your experience from the point of view of awareness, not from the point of view of the waking state.
So the waking state is only thought.
What is there in your experience to the waking state other than thought and perception?
Yeah, when you include perception, that's everything.
Yes.
But there are gaps between thoughts.
Well, if there are the gaps between the waking state is thought and perception, the gaps between thought and perception are no longer the waking state. They are pure consciousness. In other words, the waking state is something that appears in consciousness. You see, normally we think the waking state is the normal state, and consciousness is in these little gaps between the objects in the waking state. It's the other way round. The objects are the gaps in consciousness. The objects are the little places where consciousness seems not to be present, when something called matter seems to displace consciousness. It's the objects that are the gaps in consciousness, not consciousness that are in the gaps in the waking state. It's because you're starting in the waking state, you're believing the waking state is real. In the waking state, there is a reality to the waking state, but you're believing the evidence of thought and perception is real, and therefore consciousness is this thing that we just get little slithers of when a thought comes to an end, the gaps between perceptions. That is what consciousness looks like from the point of view of the waking state, but from the point of view of consciousness, which is the real point of view. The waking state is something that comes in and out of itself, comes in and out of consciousness. From the point of view of consciousness, there are no gaps in consciousness. And consciousness is never in time. Time comes into apparent existence when thought and perception appears, and it goes out of existence. In fact, when thought appears, time comes into existence. When perception appears, space comes into existence. When thought and perception dissolve, as they do all the time and space dissolve.
So the waking
in fact,
state...
time and space never, sorry to interrupt you, time and space never actually came into existence. Time is just what consciousness looks like from the point of view of thought. Space is what consciousness looks like from the point of view of perception. Or we could say that time is consciousness objectified by thought, and space is consciousness objectified by perception.
So the waking state isn't from 8 in the morning until...
No.
It's not a continuum like
No.
the mind perceives it to be.
No, but the mind, because the finite mind can only know finite objects, when the finite mind looks at eternity, it sees time. In other words, it translates eternity, the eternal now, into its own medium, and sees what is in fact the eternal now as time. It's like when you have a novel, you buy a book. The entire story in the novel takes place over 10 years. The 10 years are all present now, but the mind has to read the novel from beginning to end. So the mind experiences the novel in time, but actually the whole 10 years are all present at the same time in your hand. So what is really eternity, from the point of view of the finite mind, appears to be time.
So it's not possible to have an experience of deep sleep. Or it's not possible for the mind.
It's not possible to have an experience of anything other than consciousness.
Right, it's not possible to experience the waking state either.
The waking state is only the waking state from the point of view of the waking state. From the point of view of the dream state is the waking state. And what is considered the waking state from the waking state's point of view is, from the dream state's point of view, considered a dream. In other words, each state imposes its own limitations on the reality of experience.
Right.
If we want to know about the reality of experience, we shouldn't ask the waking state mind or the dream state mind, because they filter reality through their own limitations. They see eternity as time. They see infinity as space. They see God as matter. It's fine to use the waking state mind for the purposes for which the waking state mind is useful. But although the waking state mind is made out of the reality of infinite consciousness, it cannot know anything about infinite consciousness. Only consciousness knows consciousness. So if we want to know anything about consciousness, we have to ask consciousness. We shouldn't ask the mind. If we ask the mind what is the nature of consciousness, we know what it will say. It was born when this body was born. It shares the limitations of this body. When this body grows old and sick, consciousness grows old and sick. And then when this body dies, consciousness dies. This is what the waking state mind, or the finite mind, will tell us about consciousness. It knows nothing of consciousness. It presumes that consciousness shares its own limitations.
And in terms of deep sleep, the mind presumes it's
Yes.
not there
Just-
because the mind isn't there.
The waking state mind believes that the waking state is a multiplicity and diversity of things. And as an inevitable corollary to that belief, it thinks that deep sleep is no thing. It thinks that the waking state is things, deep sleep is no thing or nothing. So just as things are superimposed by the waking state mind on consciousness, nothing is superimposed by the waking state mind on consciousness in the experience of deep sleep. The waking state is actually not a collection of things, it is not something, and deep sleep is not nothing. They are both infinite consciousness. But from the limited perspective of the waking state is something, deep sleep is nothing. It is neither something, reality is neither something nor nothing. The perennial question that philosophers ask, how does something come out of nothing? Something doesn't come out of nothing. Reality is neither something nor nothing. It is God's infinite being. Don't try to think of it. You can't think of it. I can't think of it. But it is neither something nor nothing. It is neither the waking state nor deep sleep. The waking state and deep sleep and the intermediary step of the dreaming state are modulations. The nothingness of deep sleep and the somethingness of the waking state are modulations of the unnameable reality.
Well, if nothing else, you've succeeded in frying my mind, so I better let that sink in. Thank you.